The desert road stretched endlessly under the merciless Arizona sun, a ribbon of dust and broken dreams cutting through the wasteland like a scar across the face of God's forgotten country. Jacob Jake Thornton guided his weathered Mustang along. The familiar trail, the leather reins slick with sweat in his calloused hands. His pale blue eyes, hardened by 35 years of frontier life, scanned the horizon with the practiced caution of a man who'd learned that survival meant never trusting the silence that hung over this God-forsaken territory like a burial shroud. Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to tell us your name and the city you're watching from. We love getting to know our audience. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. That way, we can keep bringing you more stories like this one. The heat shimmered off the red sand in waves, creating phantom lakes that mocked any fool desperate enough to chase them. Jake's canteen was half empty, his shirt stained dark with perspiration despite the early afternoon hour. He'd been riding since dawn, pushing toward the small settlement of Copper Falls where honest work supposedly waited for a man willing to dirty his hands. But honest work was scarce in a land where the strongest took what they wanted and the weak were left to feed the buzzards. The ambush came at Devil's Curve, where the road bent around a cluster of blood-red sandstone rocks that had witnessed countless crimes over the decades. Jake heard the distinctive metallic click of rifle hammers being pulled back before he saw the men, 5 of them, emerging from behind the weathered boulders like vultures circling fresh carrion. At their head stood Marcus Kellerman, a man whose reputation for cruelty and greed had spread across 3 territories like a plague. Kellerman was a big man, thick through the chest and shoulders, with cold black eyes that reflected no mercy, and hands that had spilled more blood than a battlefield surgeon. A jagged scar ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, a souvenir from a knife fight in Tombstone that had left 2 men dead, and Kellerman with a taste for violence that never seemed satisfied. Well, well, famous drifter, Kellerman sneered, his gold tooth catching the afternoon light like a devil's smile. Jacob Thornton himself, riding bold as brass through my territory without so much as a how to do or paying proper respects. To the man who owns every grain of sand from here to the Mexican border, Jake's hand instinctively moved toward his Colt .45, the familiar weight of the weapon offering cold comfort against impossible odds. But he found himself staring down the barrels of 5 Winchester rifles held by men whose faces showed the casual cruelty of professional killers. The odds were impossible, even for a man who'd survived countless gunfights from Dodge City to El Paso. "What do you want, Kellerman?" Jake's voice remained steady as mountain stone, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird beating its wings against cage bars. Just as Kellerman spat, dark tobacco juice staining the sand at his feet. Pure simple justice. "For the money you cost me when you helped those damn fool settlers defend their pitiful patch of land last spring. Thought you could play hero and ride away without consequences? It's time to settle the debt, drifter. It's past time." The memory of that spring day burned bright in Jake's mind, the desperate families, the crying children, the way honest folks had looked at him with hope when Kellerman's gang came to steal their dreams. He'd stood with them because it was right, because someone had to draw a line in the sand and say no more. But every good deed in this harsh country came with a price. Written in blood and lead, the negotiation was brief and brutal as a rattlesnake. Strike. Kellerman wanted Jake's horse, his guns, his money. And his life's in that precise order, each demand delivered with increasing malice. When Jake refused to surrender, spitting defiantly into the dust between them, the rifles spoke their final argument with voices of thunder and smoke. The shots echoed across the desert like the crack of doom itself, and Jake felt the burning lead tear through his shoulder and chest, spinning him from his saddle like a rag doll tossed by an angry child. He hit the ground hard, tasting blood and sand as his vision blurred with pain and approaching darkness. They left him there, bleeding his life into the hungry sand, his faithful horse stolen, and his weapons scattered like broken promises. Consciousness faded. Jake heard Kellerman's laughter mixing with the desert wind, cold and heartless as a gravedigger's shovel. "Let the buzzards have what's left," the outlaw leader called out as his gang rode away, hoofbeats fading into the vast silence. But the desert had its own plans for Jacob Thornton. Death would have to wait its turn. Dawn broke with cruel beauty across the wasteland, painting the sky in shades of fire and blood that matched the pain coursing through Jake's broken body like liquid poison. He should have been dead, would have been, if not for the merciful shadow that fell across his face as consciousness returned with the reluctant persistence of a bad penny. Every breath felt like swallowing ground glass, and his chest burned. Where Kellerman's bullets had found their mark. "Easy there, stranger. You're hurt bad, but you're breathing, and that's more than those vultures intended." The voice belonged to Samuel Two Wolves, a half-Apache tracker whose weathered copper face bore the marks of 40 hard years spent reading sin and survival in the harshest country God ever created. His dark eyes held depths of sorrow and wisdom that came only from watching too many good people die at the hands of evil men. Samuel knelt beside Jake, water dripping from a leather pouch onto the wounded man's cracked lips like liquid salvation. His hands moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd tended wounds on battlefields from the Apache Wars to the Lincoln County Troubles. Fingers gentle despite their rope-scarred toughness. "Found you just after sunup," Samuel explained, his voice carrying the careful cadence of a man who chose his words like ammunition. Followed the buzzards circling. Figured something was dying out here. Didn't expect to find someone worth saving. He paused, studying Jake's face with the intensity of a man reading ancient petroglyphs. "You're the one they call the Drifter. The one who stood with my sister's family last spring." Samuel had been tracking Kellerman's gang for 3 months, seeking justice that the territorial law seemed unwilling or unable to provide. His sister, Maria Alina Tewolves, had married a homesteader named Patrick O'Brien. Together they'd built a small but prosperous farm in the valley near Copper Falls, when Kellerman demanded tribute money they didn't have. They'd stood there, ground with Jake's help. The outlaws' subsequent raid had cost Maria Alina her life and left Patrick broken in spirit, drinking himself toward an early grave. Recovery took 5 days in Samuel's hidden camp, nestled deep in a canyon where Apache ancestors had once sought refuge from cavalry patrols and Mexican slavers. The walls rose like cathedral spires on both sides, painted in layers of rust and gold that told stories spanning thousands of years. A thin stream of sweet water trickled down from hidden springs, creating a small oasis where desert willows and wild grass grew in defiant abundance. As Jake's strength slowly returned, so did his resolve, hardening like steel tempered in fire. But this wasn't just about personal vengeance anymore. Samuel had brought disturbing word of others across the territory who had scores to settle with Kellerman's gang. Victims whose voices had been silenced by fear and isolation until now. The network of the wronged spread across the territory like a spider's web of shared suffering. There was Maria Consuela Vasquez, a proud Mexican woman whose husband Diego had been murdered in front of their children for refusing to sell his family's ranch for 1/10 of its value. Tom Bradley, a former sheriff, turned bitter, drunk after being framed for cattle rustling and run out of Silver City with nothing but the clothes on his back. The McKenzie brothers, Scots immigrants whose cattle had been rustled systematically over 2 years until they had nothing left but debts in their fathers. Scottish pride. Each victim carried a story of loss that made Jake's blood run cold. Tales of families destroyed and dreams crushed under Kellerman's iron boot. Samuel had spent months gathering these stories, weaving connections between scattered settlements and isolated ranches, building a careful network of communication through trusted intermediaries and secret messages a man alone can't stand against. Kellerman Samuel said on the 3rd night, firelight dancing across his scarred features. But 20 men with nothing left to lose? That's something different. That's an army with a righteous cause. As Jake regained his strength, Samuel spread word through secret channels, coded messages passed by traveling merchants, signals left at specific waterholes, whispered conversations in cantinas and general stores. The Drifter lived, and he was calling in debts of honor. By the 5th night, men began arriving at the hidden canyon like ghosts materializing from the desert darkness, each bringing their own story of loss and their own hunger for justice that had been too long denied. 20 fighters total eventually. Gathered in that secret place, united by shared purpose and the promise of finally settling accounts with Marcus Kellerman, The desert winds seemed to carry their collective anger like smoke from a signal fire, announcing that the time for hiding and running was over. Justice was coming to Arizona territory, one way or another. The War Council convened under a star drunk, a sky that stretched across the heavens like black velvet studded with diamonds. 20 men gathered around a low fire that cast dancing shadows on weathered faces carved by sun, wind, and hard experience. Each rider represented years of accumulated grievance against Kellerman's reign of terror. And Jake felt the weight of their expectations settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket as he outlined the plan that would either bring justice or see them all buried in unmarked graves. "Kellerman thinks I'm buzzard food," Jake said, his voice hoarse but steady with determination that ran deeper than bone. "It gives us the element of surprise, but we can't waste it on foolishness. This isn't about revenge, it's about justice. We ride hard through the night and hit Bitter Creek at dawn. When his men are drunk, stupid, and unprepared for what's coming." The strategy was elegantly simple, but devastatingly effective. They would approach the town in 3 groups, surrounding Bitter Creek just before sunrise, and cutting off all escape routes like wolves circling wounded prey. Jake would enter the town openly, drawing Kellerman and his gang into the main street for what appeared to be a fair fight between 2 men with bad blood. The others would remain hidden in predetermined positions until needed, ensuring no innocent bystanders caught stray bullets meant for guilty men. Maria Consuelo Vasquez sat apart from the others, methodically sharpening her late husband's Bowie knife with movements that spoke of ritual and remembrance. The blade gleamed in the firelight like captured lightning, its edge honed to razor sharpness. "Kellerman destroyed my family," she said, her voice carrying the quiet fury of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. "Murdered my Diego in front of our children, told them their father died because he was too proud to know his place. Tomorrow, I help destroy his." The McKenzie brothers, Connor and Fergus, checked their ammunition with methodical Scottish precision, counting and recounting cartridges like rosary beads in the hands of desperate sinners. They'd lost everything cattle, land. Their youngest brother Hamished Kellerman's systematic campaign of theft and intimidation. Connor, the elder at 28, bore responsibility like a cross, while 25-year-old Fergus burned with the cold fire of Highland, vengeance that had driven their ancestors to fight impossible odds at Culloden and beyond. Tom Bradley sat hunched over a hand-drawn map of Bitter Creek's layout, shaking hands betraying the effects of too much whiskey and too little justice. Once he'd been Silver City's most respected lawman, a man who wore the badge with honor and protected the innocent with unwavering courage. Now he was a broken drunk whose badge had been stripped away by corrupt officials bought and paid for by Kellerman's blood money. But the fire of justice still burned in his alcohol-dimmed eyes. His gun hand remained steady when it mattered. Samuel Two Wolves sat apart from the others, forming a private ritual that honored both his Apache heritage and his sister's memory. He'd painted his face with traditional war paint using ochre and charcoal, calling upon the spirits of his ancestors to guide his aim and strengthen his resolve. His Winchester rifle lay across his knees like a sleeping snake, its brass cartridges gleaming with deadly promise. As the night deepened, the riders shared stories around the dying fire, tales that bound them together with threads stronger than blood or gold. Stories of loss and injustice, of children left fatherless and wives left widowed, of the slow corruption that had allowed men like Kellerman to terrorize honest folk while territorial authorities looked the other way or lined their pockets with outlaw gold. Old Pete Carruthers, a grizzled prospector whose mining claim had been jumped by Kellerman's men, told of watching his partner beaten to death with pick handles while he hid in terror among the rocks. Young Billy Santos, barely 18, spoke of his father's murder during a supposed fair gunfight where Kellerman's men had shot the elder Santos in the back. Each account added fuel to the fire burning in their collective hearts, a flame that would not be extinguished until justice was served, hot as desert. Noondot, the pre-dawn hours, brought nervous energy and final preparations that felt like communion before battle. Horses were saddled in reverent silence, weapons checked one last time with the solemnity of men preparing for their own funerals. Jake walked among them, offering quiet words of encouragement and checking each man's resolve like a general inspecting his troops before the charge. As they mounted up, Jake looked at the faces surrounding him, hardened by loss, but united in purpose. Transformed from scattered victims into an army of the righteous, whatever happened at Bitter Creek, they would face it together. 20 against 5. Justice against greed. Light against darkness. The ride began in the cold hour before dawn. 20 riders moving like shadows across the desert floor, their horses' hooves muffled by sand and their hearts beating in rhythm with approaching destiny. Behind them, the first pale light of dawn began to creep across the eastern horizon, like God's own judgment. Herald of the reckoning that Kellerman had earned with every drop of innocent blood he'd spilled, Bitter Creek slumbered in the pre-dawn. Darkness like a guilty conscience trying to hide from judgment, its main street empty save for a few drunken stragglers from the previous night celebrations stumbling between the saloon and the brothel. The town squatted in the desert like a collection of wooden bones bleached by sun and scoured by wind. A place where honest folks kept their heads down and their mouths shut if they wanted to see another sunrise. The saloon where Kellerman and his gang had been toasting Jake's supposed death stood silent as a tomb, its bat-wing doors hanging motionless in the still air. Through the grimy windows, the silhouettes of sleeping men could be seen sprawled across tables and chairs. Empty whiskey bottles and playing cards scattered around them like evidence of their moral bankruptcy. Jake rode slowly down the center of the street, his presence announced only by the soft clop of his horse's hooves on the packed earth and the creak of leather that seemed to echo off the false-fronted buildings like whispered prayers. Every shadow could hide an enemy, every window might frame a rifle barrel. But he rode straight and tall in the saddle like a man who'd made peace with whatever fate awaited him in this God-forsaken place. The bullet wounds in his shoulder and chest ached with each movement, tender reminders of Kellerman's treachery, but the pain only sharpened his focus like a whetstone on steel. This was the moment everything had been building toward, all the suffering, all the loss, all the nights spent planning justice in the hidden canyon. The scales would be balanced today, one way or another. He dismounted in front of the saloon. With deliberate ceremony, his boots hitting the boardwalk with the finality of a judge's gavel. Drawing a deep breath of the cool morning air, he called out in a voice that carried across the sleeping town like the trumpet of judgment itself, "Marcus Kellerman, come out and face what you started. Time to settle our account." The response was immediate and chaotic as a kicked anthill. Windows flew open throughout the building, boots thundered on wooden floors like distant artillery, and curses filled the air as Kellerman's gang realized their victim had returned from the dead to collect what was owed. Bottles crashed to the floor, chairs overturned, and the sounds of men scrambling for weapons created a symphony of panic that music to Jake's ears. Within 5 minutes that felt like hours, saloon doors exploded outward and 5 men emerged into the growing light, led by Kellerman himself. The outlaw leader's face had gone pale as bleached bone beneath his perpetual sneer. His black eyes wide with disbelief and something that might have been fear if he'd possessed enough humanity to feel such emotions. "Impossible," Kellerman breathed, his hand hovering over his gun like a rattlesnake preparing to strike. "We left you dead in the desert, feeding buzzards and coyotes. Saw you fall with my own eyes. Takes more than 5 bullets to kill a man with unfinished business," Jake replied, his own hand steady beside his holster, fingers loose and ready. "You and I have an account to settle, Marcus. Past time we balanced the books." The confrontation played out in the street's dusty theater, witnessed by the growing crowd of townspeople who emerged from their homes like prairie dogs, cautiously poking their heads up after a storm. Men, women, and children gathered behind windows and doorways, drawn by morbid curiosity and the desperate hope that someone might finally stand up to the man who'd terrorized their community for too long. But Kellerman was a coward beneath his fearsome reputation, a man who'd built his power on intimidation and overwhelming odds rather than genuine courage. As his hand moved toward his weapon, he signaled his men with a slight nod. The same treacherous gesture that had sealed Jake's fate at Devil's Curve. The 4 remaining members of his gang began to spread out, attempting to surround the lone Drifter in a replay of their previous ambush. That's when 20 riders appeared from the shadows, like avenging angels called forth by the prayers of the innocent. Samuel Tuwolfs materialized from behind the general store, his war paint gleaming in the early light. Maria Consuela stepped out from the livery stable, her husband's knife glinting in her grip. The Mackenzie brothers emerged from opposite ends of the street, their rifles trained on Kellerman's men with Highland precision. Tom Bradley appeared on the saloon's balcony, sheriff's instincts guiding him to the high ground. The remaining riders took their positions with military efficiency, surrounding the outlaws in a perfect circle of justice that allowed no escape. For the first time in years, Marcus Kellerman found himself outnumbered and outgunned. Facing the combined fury of every family he'd destroyed, every dream he'd crushed, every life he'd stolen. "Seems like you've got some visitors, Marcus," Jake said, his voice carrying quiet satisfaction. "Folks you've wronged over the years. They've come to collect what you owe them." The final gunfight was brief, but decisive as summer lightning. Jake reached for his gun first, his survival instincts overriding his cowardice. But Jake's draw was faster, his aim truer, his cause more righteous. The Colt .45 bucked in his hand like a living thing, and Kellerman spun like a broken doll before falling face first into the dust where he belonged. His blood soaking into the thirsty earth, his remaining gang members threw down their weapons. Rather than face the unified fury of 20 wronged citizens who'd had enough of running and hiding. Some battles were worth fighting, but this one was already lost before it began, as the sun crested the horizon, painting Bitter Creek in golden light that seemed to wash away years of fear and oppression. Justice had been served with the finality of a closed book. The townspeople emerged to reclaim their streets, while Jake and his riders prepared to return to their separate lives, their shared purpose fulfilled and their debts of honor paid in full. They had come together as scattered victims and rode away as instruments of justice, proving that when honest people stood together against evil, even the darkness had to yield to the light. Some debts they had learned could only be paid in full when courage replaced fear and justice replaced submission. Jake mounted his horse one final time, his wounds healing and his conscience clear, riding toward whatever tomorrow might bring. To a man who'd helped balance the scales of justice in a harsh and unforgiving land,